Jack Jones? The unidentified man, later known as Pinellas County John Doe, was found in July 1992 on a sidewalk at 19th Street and Central Avenue in St. Petersburg, Florida. After being diagnosed with head trauma, he was taken to Bayfront Medical Center, then transferred to Gulfport Convalescent Center Nursing Home 2 months later. Despite medical care, he passed away on October 9, 1992. His identity remained unknown, and the case was classified as a mystery for many years. Investigators have continued to seek answers, hoping for a breakthrough in identifying this man and understanding the circumstances surrounding his death. When the man was initially found in July, he was wearing a red checkered shirt, a pair of blue pants, and eyeglasses. He also had a pocket knife with him. He was described as having brown eyes, black bushy eyebrows, and gray hair. He also had a mole on the left side of his face, as well as on his right temple. He was estimated to be between the ages of 40-60 years. He was approximately 6 feet tall and weighed around 8 pounds 146. His identity was a mystery at his time of demise and in the 32 years since. In July 2008, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. A composite sketch was developed and released to the public in hopes that it would generate new leads about the man's identity. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the St. Petersburg Police Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram. They were hoping to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the man. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. In July 2024, after extensive forensic genetic genealogy work by Othram's in-house team, the mystery of Pinellas County John Doe was finally solved. Using the man's DNA profile, the team was able to trace potential relatives, leading to a breakthrough in the investigation. Reference DNA samples were collected from family members, which confirmed the identity of the man as Jack Jones, born February 18, 1932. Jack had last been seen by his family in June 1992, just before he was found in St. Petersburg, Florida. This identification brought closure to a case that had remained unsolved for over 3 decades. Moving on to the next case. Harlan L. Serene. In September 2001, partial skeletal remains of an unknown male were transferred to the Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office in Kansas City, Missouri. Despite efforts to determine the man's identity, the details surrounding the original discovery date and other circumstances remain unclear. Due to the lack of information, the man was initially referred to as Jackson County John Doe. In June 2011, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite the efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man over the years, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2023, the Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram. They wanted to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the man. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the unknown man. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct a genetic genealogy research. This ultimately provided new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads. This led investigators to potential relatives of the man. Reference DNA samples were collected from the potential relatives and compared to the DNA profile of the unknown man. In July 2024, this investigation led to the positive identification of the man. He is now known to be Harlan L. Serene, born December 3, 1934. Harlan was known to have lived in the city of St. Joseph, Missouri in the 1980s. Moving on to the next case. Michael Ray Schlicht. On September 14, 1974, 2 people off-roading in Aliso Viejo, California, discovered human remains belonging to a male on the side of a trail. The man appeared to have died a few days before being found. Initially, the incident was ruled accidental, caused by alcohol and diazepam intoxication. However, in 1980, investigators uncovered the bodies of other men who had also died from alcohol and diazepam intoxication. Noticing a pattern, they began to suspect that foul play could be involved. Confirming their beliefs, over the years, the bodies of multiple young men were found throughout Southern California. Some of them were found near where the 1974 John Doe's remains were located. In May 1983, Randy Stephen Kraft, later known as the Scorecard Slayer, was arrested for taking the life of a California Highway Patrol officer conducting a traffic stop on Kraft. There was a body belonging to a male victim, later identified as Terry Lee Gambrell, in the front seat. There were several empty beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets at his feet. Prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets at his feet. In the trunk of Kraft's vehicle was a coded list of his likely over 67 victims. In May 1989, Kraft was convicted. Now 78 years old, he remains incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison. The 1974 John Doe has long been thought to be an early victim of Kraft, but for so long, he remained unidentified. Despite attempts to establish the victim's identity, he was interred at El Toro Memorial Park in an unmarked grave. In November 2022, investigators began using genetic genealogy to try to identify John Doe and eventually found relatives in October 2023. The victim was identified as 17-year-old Michael Ray Schlicht of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The teenager loved warm weather according to his family and was known to hitchhike. His family members requested privacy and planned to install a headstone to mark his final resting place. In 2022, investigators with the Orange County Sheriff's Department enlisted the help of Othram Laboratories to solve the case. They developed a DNA profile from the victim's tissue samples and were able to identify his potential grandparents. The couple's granddaughter informed investigators that she hadn't seen her 17-year-old brother, Michael, since April 1974. A DNA sample from a woman believed to be John Doe's mother confirmed the victim's identity as Michael Schlicht. While it is suspected that Randy Stephen Kraft was responsible for Michael's death, police have continued to investigate the case. Moving on to the next case. Gail Marlene Johnson. On September 15, 2000, a teenage couple taking a walk through Long Lake Regional Park in New Brighton, Minnesota, discovered the remains of a woman in a swampy area. The body had been exposed to the elements for several months, resulting in mummification. The woman, believed to be Caucasian, was estimated to be between 25 and 50 years old and stood 5 feet 5 inches tall with medium-long strawberry blonde to red hair. No clothing was found with the remains, but one white tennis shoe was located near the body. The cause could not be determined due to the level of decomposition. However, investigators believe someone had taken her life, and she had possibly been stabbed. Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension collected DNA material from the remains back in 2000, but it did not match any missing persons in their database at the time. Despite a plethora of leads, investigators were unable to identify her or the perpetrator. The case went cold. In 2011, Detective Gary Sykes with the New Brighton Police Department had this to say about the case. He remembered the 911 call that September 2000 afternoon. He investigated the case back then and was still investigating it in 2011. A lot of work over a lot of years, and we are really no closer now than we were back then. He has compared her to some 350 missing women. He has examined dental records and every other lead that has come in. Any case where you cannot get to the conclusion that you want to get to is tough. I think that there is somebody who knows how she got there and what happened to her, said Sykes. She deserves better than what she has got. The couple that found the victim recalled that day. They are Jennifer Leach and her husband, Nathan. We both at the time said, it's a body. It's a body. It's a body. The two were in high school that September day. Rollerblading through the park, they rolled up on a shoe still tightly tied and no one was around. It seemed really odd. "It did not add up to us," said Nathan. They walked up a nearby deer path, and that is when they found the woman's body. Finally, on September 15, 2023, the New Brighton Department of Public Safety announced that they have learned the identity of the woman in what was now a 23-year-old cold case. The identity of the woman has been revealed to be 40-year-old Gail Marlene Johnson. At the time of her demise, investigators believed she was last known to reside in Minneapolis. Investigators began working with Astria Forensics and built a DNA profile in order to establish a family tree. Using this profile, the DNA Dope Project and investigators were ultimately able to establish a genetic connection to Gail's family. Investigators obtained a DNA sample from a family member and confirmed the genetic familial connection. New Brighton Public Safety Director Tony Patsnick stated, "It has been 23 years, and we never gave up on finding out who this woman was and what happened to her. Identifying her provides an important new clue as we continue our work to determine the circumstances of her tragic end." Investigators are urging anyone who knew Gail or had been in contact with her before her death to contact the police department at 651-288-4141. Moving on to the next case. Edward Eugene Pottmeyer. In September 1998, a 48-year-old woman was jogging on a bike path in the Fair Lakes area of Fairfax County, Virginia, when she was assaulted by an unknown man who implied he had a knife. The man fled the scene on foot after assaulting the woman. 2 years later, on August 3, 2000, at approximately 11 p.m., the same unknown man forced his way into a home on Parkside Drive in Fairfax, Virginia. He attacked and assaulted a 66-year-old woman who had been asleep. The woman fought him off and managed to escape by jumping from a second-story balcony and running away. Another 4 years later, on December 6, 2004, around 10:45 p.m., a 51-year-old woman was in her basement in the 9900 block of Whitewater Drive in Burke when she saw a man exposing himself outside her sliding glass door. The victim yelled and the man ran away. DNA evidence was collected in each of these cases from the crime scenes. Traditional DNA testing was also conducted. An STR profile for the unknown male suspect in each case was developed and entered into CODIS. The STR profile from each scene matched to a single unknown male. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement to identify the man responsible, no known matches were found. The cases went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In an attempt to finally identify the man responsible for these violations, the Fairfax County Police Department teamed with Othram. They wanted to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the man responsible. In 2023, the Fairfax County Police Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct extensive genetic genealogy research. This ultimately provided new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using this new information. The investigation finally led to the identification of a possible suspect. A DNA sample was collected from the potential suspect and compared to the forensic evidence from the crime scenes. This led to the positive identification of the man responsible. He is known to be 58-year-old Edward Eugene Pottmeyer of Chantilly, Virginia. Following the confirmation of his identity, the Fairfax County Police Department obtained warrants for his arrest on charges of forcible sodomy and abduction with the intent to defile. Detectives were able to connect his DNA to the 3 decades-old assaults. On Wednesday, June 5, 2024, Pottmeyer was taken into custody. He was booked at the Fairfax County Adult Detention Center with the assistance of the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. He is being held on no bond. Detectives would like to speak to anyone who may have information about these cases or believe they had unlawful contact with Pottmeyer. Anyone with information about these incidents is urged to contact the Fairfax County Police Department's non-emergency phone number at 703-246-7511. Tips can also be submitted anonymously through Crime Solvers by calling 1-866-411-TIPS, 866-411-8477. victim specialists from the Fairfax County Police Department's Major Crimes Bureau, specifically the Victim Services Division, have been assigned to provide the necessary resources and assistance to the victims involved. Moving on to the next case. Darlene Zetterauer. Darlene Zetterauer and Barbara Schreiber, close friends from Savannah, Georgia, had an inseparable bond that spanned their childhood. In June 1975, the two girls were filled with excitement as they looked forward to a summer of adventure in Hollywood, Florida. However, their plans took a dark turn on the evening of June 18, 1975. The girls left Barbara's home, telling Barbara's mother that they were going to spend the night at their friend Valerie's house. Yet, their actual whereabouts that night remain unclear, and reports about their movements vary. The lack of clarity surrounding their plans and the subsequent disappearance has made it difficult to piece together exactly what happened. The conflicting details about their movements that evening have only deepened the mystery of their case. However, most accounts suggest they stopped by the home of a friend, Gail, a close friend of Darlene. It was a sunny June day in 1975 when Barbara Schreiber and Darlene Zetterauer, both 14 years old, strolled down the streets of their Hollywood neighborhood. They paused on a bench at the corner of Sterling Road and Northwest 40th Street. Gail, the last verified person to see the best friends alive, vividly recalls spotting them sitting together on a busy street bench in Hollywood near the intersection of Route 441 and Hollywood Boulevard. Her memories of Darlene paint a picture of a lively, fun-loving girl with a unique way of pulling back her hair with her fingers. On that warm summer evening, the girls, who had no car and were unable to drive, relied on hitchhiking to get around. It was a common practice for youngsters like them, seeking a sense of freedom and adventure. They were enjoying the simple pleasures of their carefree summer, filled with laughter and excitement before entering high school. However, the atmosphere of normalcy shifted when Gail, a friend who was with them, recalls seeing a white van pull up near the bench where the girls were sitting. According to Gail, both Barbara and Darlene appeared to willingly get into the van, seemingly without any hesitation. What seemed like an ordinary encounter quickly took a dark turn, as the white van drove off with the two girls, and their fates would soon become shrouded in mystery. Once the door closed, their fate was sealed. Unlike Gail, Darlene and Barbara were bold and outgoing girls. Gail wanted to join them on their escapades, but she had a strict father who would not have approved of her entering a stranger's van. Gail ultimately decided to stay back. It was this keen parental guidance that ultimately saved Gail's life, as it was the last time Darlene and Barbara were seen alive. Barbara and Darlene's disappearance shocked the community, leaving their families and friends desperate for answers. The unsettling mystery surrounding their abduction remained unsolved until the morning of June 19, 1975. While out on a family fishing trip, a family stumbled upon a horrifying discovery along the canal. There, lying side by side, were the lifeless bodies of the two teenage girls. The scene, found approximately 4 miles north of Andytown, an outpost long forgotten by most, was chilling and devastating. The girls had been abandoned in this remote location, their lives tragically cut short. The discovery marked the beginning of an investigation into the brutal end to a promising summer, and the search for answers into what happened that night on June 18, 1975. Investigators revealed a chilling truth. Both victims had suffered a fatal gunshot wound, likely from a large caliber bullet, perhaps a .45, evident from the substantial amount of blood at the scene. Blood splatter analysis indicated that both the girls met their untimely demise where their bodies were found. Conflicting reports emerged regarding their state of clothes, with some suggesting they were fully clothed, while others hinted at the possibility of something even more sinister. They were both brutally forced before the fatal massacre. Following the discovery of Barbara and Darlene's bodies, Gail, the last person to have seen them alive, shared her fearful reflections with the media. "I was scared for them," she recalled, her voice filled with unease. "I did not understand what was happening. I am grateful that I did not follow them into that unknown situation." Gail's solemn words highlighted the chilling reality of the tragic events. She spoke with a sense of regret and fear, believing that whoever was responsible for the girls' fate was simply a sick individual. Her testimony added to the sense of horror that surrounded the case, further deepening the mystery of what had transpired that evening. The overwhelming uncertainty surrounding the events leading to the tragic end of Barbara and Darlene cast a shadow over the community. The initial investigation led the detectives to Valerie, the supposed host of the planned sleepover, which revealed the stark truth. The teens had never arranged to spend the night. It was a ploy often used by Barbara and Darlene when they sought to venture out without their parents' knowledge. According to investigators from Broward County, witness interviews suggested the girls might have been attempting to hitch a ride north, possibly in pursuit of illicit substances. Despite the overwhelming community and media support driven by the innocence and youth of the victims, investigators were hindered by the lack of modern technology, which made capturing the elusive perpetrator nearly impossible. There were no leads, and without the technological tools available today, the case grew more and more challenging as time went on. The investigation eventually went cold. Broward County Sheriff Detective Andrew Giannino carried the burden of the cold case for decades, dedicating himself to the relentless pursuit of justice. His efforts were supported by numerous detectives, deputies, crime scene investigators, and forensic specialists from the Broward Sheriff's Office, all of whom continued to search for answers long after the case had gone cold. Their unwavering dedication to unveil the truth behind the cold case eventually reaped fruit decades later. In early 2023, the Broward Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit took charge. They were met with stacks of reports, numerous crime scene photos, boxes of evidence, and the clothing worn by Barbara and Darlene. Detective Roberto Casares from the BSO Crime Scene Unit meticulously examined Darlene's clothing, isolating DNA trapped within the garment fibers. This meticulous process finally yielded what the detectives had been waiting for nearly 50 years. After nearly half a century of dead ends, the Cold Case Unit achieved a significant breakthrough by extracting a complete DNA profile of the suspect. With this newfound evidence, investigators combed through databases, eventually finding a match. The DNA linked Robert Clark Keebler to the case, confirming him as the primary suspect. This revelation provided a sense of relief after years of painful uncertainty, bringing justice for Barbara and Darlene within reach. Further investigation into Keebler's past uncovered a disturbing history of armed robbery, forced intercourse, and aggravated assault, with incidents spanning from California to South Florida, painting a grim portrait of the man responsible for their tragic deaths. Authorities confirmed Keebler passed away in 2019 in South Florida, closing the door on the chance for direct accountability. Yet the pursuit of answers for the victims' families persisted. Detective Giannino's investigation led him to believe that Robert Clark Keebler drove Barbara and Darlene to the isolated Everglades where he subjected them to horrific assault before shooting them. Before the DNA testing, there had been no evidence linking him to the case. As the case concluded with a sense of closure, a new chapter of inquiry unfolds. Investigators are now exploring the possibility that Keebler could be linked to other unsolved crimes, particularly the flat tire slaying and other cases in South Florida. The relentless search for DNA evidence continues as detectives comb through past leads and clues to connect these cases. Barbara and Darlene, whose futures were tragically cut short, are deeply missed by their families and all who loved them. Their story serves as a poignant reminder of potential unfulfilled, a life stolen before it could truly begin. This tragedy, forever etched in history, continues to echo, with hope that answers and justice may still be within reach, thanks to the efforts of the community and investigators. Moving on to the next case. Lisa Ziegert. When 24-year-old Lisa Ziegert, who worked the night shift, went missing, both her family and the police feared the worst after traces of blood and signs of a struggle were found at her workplace. Despite an extensive search over the following days, their worst fears were confirmed when her body was discovered 5 kilometers from her workplace. For decades, efforts to apprehend her killer were unsuccessful. Finally, after 25 years, her loved ones have received answers about what happened to Lisa Ziegert. This case takes us to Agawam, Massachusetts, a small town near the western Connecticut border. Agawam is best known for the Six Flags amusement park, the largest of its kind in New England. The park features a wave pool, numerous water slides, and 8 thrilling roller coasters. Agawam also boasts Robinson State Park, a popular day-use park offering biking trails, fishing ponds, walking paths, kayaking, and cross-country skiing. The city's economy is driven by industries like construction, manufacturing, and retail, and its residents appreciate the convenience of living in Agawam. Most residents commute 25 minutes or less to work, making it an attractive place to live. Agawam is home to 3 elementary schools, including Agawam High School, which honors one of the town's most beloved teachers with a memorial, Lisa Ziegert, whose untimely death changed the city of Agawam forever. Lisa Marie Ziegert was born on the March 24, 1968 in Holyoke, Massachusetts to George and Diane Ziegert. Lisa grew up in a loving, tight-knit family. She had 3 other siblings named Sharon, David, and Lynn. Lisa and her family were residents of Agawam. Lisa developed a deep passion for music while growing up, learning to play several instruments. She even joined school musical groups during her youth. After high school, Lisa attended Westfield State University, where she pursued a degree in education and graduated in 1990. Lisa worked as an intern and took on multiple shifts as a counselor at a children's camp, enjoying every opportunity to teach. Teaching was a profession she truly loved. She took her profession seriously and was active at it in every way. She had also taught Sunday school at her church. After her internship was over, at the age of 24, Lisa accepted a position as a teacher's assistant at Agawam High School, where she had previously attended as a teenager. There, she worked primarily with a group of kids that had special needs. Lisa had a greater understanding of her students than any other instructor. She was also very professional and worked hard to ensure that every one of her students received the best education possible. Lisa was a very special person. With the kids, she always had a special rapport. They knew that she really liked them, and that she treated them like people, Lisa's mom said. In the evenings, after the shift at school was over, Lisa also had a part-time job at the neighborhood Brittany card and gift shop. One fateful Wednesday afternoon, on September 15, 1992, was typical for Lisa Ziegler. She had concluded her shift at the school. She left the school building around 4:30 p.m. and drove directly to the card and gift store, where she worked weekdays from 5 to 9 p.m. Her sister, Lynn, briefly dropped by around 5:30 p.m. to keep her company because Lisa would always complain to her family about how bored, lonely, and scared she feels while at the shop at night. According to Lynn, during her visit to the store, there was no sign of Lisa being in a bad mood. She said her sister was cheerful the whole time that evening, and nothing seemed off. It was easy talk. It was sister talk. It was a little after 6 p.m. when I left. And then I went home and she was fine. You know, she was fine when I left, Lynn said. By 8:45 a.m. the next morning, Sophia Maynard arrived at the card and gift store, just as she did every day, to open up. She was supposed to start work at 9 o'clock. However, she was shocked to see Lisa's car in the parking lot, as Lisa typically worked at the school in the mornings and wasn't expected to be in the store while classes were in session. Sophia noticed that a light was on inside the store and the doors open sign was visible. At that point, Sophia thought that Lisa might have missed the school morning shift because of the incoming Easter celebration. She and Lisa intended to stuff some balloons for sale during that holiday. When Sophia entered the store, she called Lisa's name multiple times, but she got no answer. I called her name a couple of times, and I figured she'd just pop her head out. She didn't. I came behind the counter. All of her things were there, her drawings, her pocketbook, her car keys. And then, I just kind of freaked out, Sophia said. Everything looked strange to Sophia. She felt something was not right. She immediately dashed out the store and ran across the street to a restaurant there, and then asked them to call the police. As soon as the police got there, they started inspecting the store. The front of the building appeared to be normal, but the back had a creepy opening. Approaching the storeroom at the back, officers discovered numerous shattered bags that had blood stains on them. They also found several cards scattered across the floor, covered in blood. which indicated a struggle between Lisa Ziegert and her attacker. Additionally, there were small dirt traces near the door, which investigators believed could have been from a shoe. Despite these clues, the investigators were unable to find any useful leads within the store. That morning, Lisa failed to show up at school, which was unusual for her. The principal called her mother to check if everything was okay with her, but Diane Ziegert had no idea where her daughter was. Her news of disappearance traveled the town of Agawam, and within hours, all of her friends, family, and acquaintances began to do all they can to bring Lisa back home. The police's initial strategy to the case was to develop a robbery theory, but that theory was quickly abandoned when they discovered that the perpetrator had not accessed Lisa's wallet or cash register. The goods in the store were also not missing. The second approach the detectives took in the case was to retrace the timeline of what happened the previous evening. Investigators learned that Lisa's sister had left the shop around 6 p.m. They also spoke with store owners and neighbors near the card and gift shop. It was revealed that Lisa had a conversation with the owner of the carpet shop next door around 7:20 p.m. During their discussion, they talked about an ongoing issue with their local parking lot, which was being used by patrons of the nearby bowling alley. The shop owner informed Lisa that he wouldn't risk publicly criticizing the drivers who had parked in front of their stores. He claimed that many of them were crazy and dangerous. After about 15 minutes of conversation with Lisa, he left to go home. Police went through the cash register and discovered that the most recent time money had been deposited was 8:20 p.m. Investigators also located a woman who entered the store at about 9 p.m. She said the store's door was open but nobody came out to attend to her, so she left. Before taking her leave, she claimed to have heard noises coming from the back room. She said it was a banging noise, but she didn't think much of it and decided to leave. The police were able to determine the general time frame of Lisa's disappearance. She finished attending to her last customer at 8:20 p.m. and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were then left with the questions of what had happened to Lisa Ziegert within those 40 minutes. On the day Lisa was discovered missing, the local police together with the FBI and the Massachusetts State Police carried out a massive search for her. The search party on foot explored the vicinity of the store while the helicopter searched farther off areas. Additionally, police dogs were brought to the store area in an effort to follow Lisa's track. Sadly, none of these produced any favorable outcomes. On April 17, 1992, the head of the local police department announced that the case had been reclassified from a missing person case to a kidnapping case. This was done because investigators were confident that Lisa had not left the store of her own free will. 2 days after she vanished, the police were already looking into a kidnapping case. On Easter Sunday, April 19th, all the nearby churches prayed for Lisa Ziegert to be found alive and unharmed. Even though it was Easter, there was no sense of celebration. Around 2 p.m. that same day, a call was made to the police. On the outskirts of the town, close to Route 75, a man was walking his dog. He spotted a woman's body while walking through the wooded area. He immediately alerted the police afterwards. When police arrived, they identified the victim as Lisa Ziegert. They discovered multiple stab wounds on her neck and legs, which had been inflicted by a sharp object. Medical professionals later determined that Lisa had also been sexually assaulted. Investigators concluded that her body had been dumped 5 kilometers away from the store, suggesting that the perpetrator had likely transported her there in a vehicle. To preserve any potential evidence, detectives quickly cordoned off the area and proceeded in a single line to secure the site. At the time, it was raining and the muddy road was covered in tire tracks. Sadly, the cops were unable to locate the murder weapon or any other concrete proof. The sad news that Lisa Ziegert had been brutally murdered by an unidentified killer immediately went around the city of Agawam. The church where she taught Sunday school on Sundays, in her honor, organized a farewell service. Around 1,000 people attended the service. People said good things about her. Lisa was loved, and the news of her premature demise made residents of the small community of Agawam, who were used to living in peace and safety, experience a mood that was almost panic. Many store owners canceled single shifts and employees escorted one another to their cars at night. Within a matter of days, the self-defense instructors had a lot of students coming in for classes. Also, roughly 300 women filed for a license to possess a gun. The entire community was terrified that an unidentified criminal would attack one of them again. Amidst all these, the FBI and the police were fervently working on the case non-stop. It soon became public knowledge that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene. The DNA sample might have belonged to the murderer. The investigators at some point brought Lisa's boyfriend in for questioning since they suspected him. He, however, had an alibi and the DNA sample from the crime scene did not match his DNA. Additionally, DNA testing was done on Lisa's friends, co-workers, and relatives, and again, no matches were found. Numerous tips were sent to the police by locals. On the night of Lisa's murder, there were several reports of a strange car. Others claimed to know the offender's identity, but detectives weeded out all of these leads since they were dead ends. The police concluded that a van or a large SUV had left the tire tracks on the road close to where the body was discovered. Despite extensive questioning of drivers with similar vehicles, detectives made little progress in identifying the offender. However, they eventually located a potential witness who might have seen a vehicle of interest that night. Around 9:15 p.m., a worker from a nearby store was heading home when she stopped at a traffic light. She noticed a large SUV pulling off the road and heading toward the area where Lisa's body was later found. Due to the darkness, the woman could not provide specific details about the vehicle but recalled seeing what appeared to be a man and a woman inside. She also mentioned the peculiar fact that the woman's head was oddly jerking as if she were dozing off or unconscious when the car pulled into the gravel road. Unfortunately, the information did not help in identifying the suspect. Since then, all leads have been exhausted. Police kept working on the case. But as each month went by, the likelihood of cracking this mysterious case diminished before Lisa's family and friends were given another opportunity to learn the truth. An additional year and a half had gone. National television aired an episode about the case in October 1993. The well-liked program featured unresolved case stories that received a ton of attention. This occasionally brought fresh witnesses to the police attention, giving the case new life. Lisa's case was not different. The police received 700 calls from callers with some kind of information within an hour of the broadcast. Most of these leads, as is usual, went nowhere, though all of them were looked into by the police. The cops claimed to have found a few worthwhile leads, but they did not say which one. Sadly, it also had little effect. The likelihood of cracking the case significantly decreased with time. The family of Lisa went to tremendous lengths to make sure her legacy was preserved and not forgotten. Despite the early end to Lisa's teaching career, her family had a significant impact on the Agawam's educational system. 3 years after Lisa's murder, in 1995, her parents donated $11,000 specifically to the school's science department, where Lisa worked. These donations were used to support genetics classes and to purchase equipments. Additionally, her parents established a fund for special needs students, which gave them around $35,000 in scholarships. 2002 made it 10 years since Lisa was killed. Still, her mother, Dee Ziegert, held out hope that the case will eventually be solved. She made considerable efforts to preserve her daughter's memories. She partook in every interview and responded to every questions from the media. Each year, she assembled a sizable crowd to light candles in Lisa's memory. During this time, investigators continued their relentless work on Lisa Ziegert's case. The only significant evidence they had was a DNA sample obtained from the alleged murderer. They tirelessly cross-referenced the sample with databases of known criminals, hoping the real suspect would eventually be identified. However, months turned into years, and the killer remained elusive. After 24 long years, on September 24, 2016, investigators decided to take a new approach to solving the case. They then opted for DNA phenotyping. The basic idea behind it is that specialists can determine a person's supposed portrait and physical characteristics from the data contained in their DNA. For example, with the use of DNA, experts can determine a person's gender, their approximate age, eye color, and hair color. Although the portrait created using this data may not always be correct, but occasionally, the coincidence of the portrait matching the face of the real suspect is remarkable. Based on the DNA sample of Lisa's murderer, investigators were able to produce two portraits of the culprit, one at age 25 and the other at age 50. After the photos were released to the public, more than 170 calls were made to the police department. People who made these calls claimed to have seen a similar man. However, the majority of these leads were fruitless. On September 18, 2017, just a year later, police made an unexpected prominent announcement. The offender had been taken into custody. He was identified as Gary Shara, a 49-year-old man. The news of his arrest immediately spread like wildfire throughout the media. Rarely do the police catch the murderer 25 years after the crime was committed. As a result, such stories immediately garner a lot of public interest. The moment Gary Shara was taken into custody, the detectives made public how they had located him. It was discovered that Gary was listed as a suspect in 1993, the year after Lisa was killed. Do you remember that federal television program that resulted in thousands of phone calls with leads for the police? Well, it happened that a Seattle lawyer was one of those callers. At the time, he informed the police that his client might know something about Lisa's death. His client was a woman who was divorcing her spouse at the time. The couple lived in Longmeadow, a town near Agawam. The woman reported that her husband had been unusually fixated on Lisa Ziegert's case during the time it was being broadcast. She mentioned that whenever Lisa's murder was mentioned on TV, her husband would enter the room, fixate on the screen, and stare vacantly, seemingly unaware of anything else happening around him. This behavior raised suspicions, and the husband in question was Gary Shara. At the time of Lisa's murder, he was 24 years old and was married with a 1-year-old son. Gary Shara and his wife were always arguing and getting into fights. And soon after the birth of their son, they had already started their divorce process. In 1993, according to the police statement, investigators had already developed the notion that Gary was involved in Lisa's murder, but they couldn't find any proof to back it up. Also, his ex-wife, who provided the information, made the police doubt her testimony. And this is because she had a long history of alcohol abuse in addition to a long list of mental illnesses. Additionally, Gary was granted legal custody of their son after the divorce, but his wife secretly transferred the boy to a different state. It's also crucial to note that this wasn't the first time some wives contacted the police to report that their husbands might have been responsible for Lisa Ziegert's death. There were a lot of calls like that, and the police assumed Gary Shara's case was one of them. Despite all these, at a point, Gary was questioned in an interview, but he claimed not to be involved in Lisa's murder and declined to provide a sample of his DNA. With no legal means to force Gary Shara to provide a DNA sample, the police were left with no choice but to focus on him as a suspect. They compiled a list of all the men who had been questioned about the crime but had refused to provide their DNA. Gary Shara's name appeared on this list, and he was repeatedly called in for questioning. In 2008, during his third interview, Shara displayed unusual behavior, trying to avoid touching anything in the room, including the table in front of him. Even when offered a bottle of water, he refused to touch it. He gave off the impression that his only thought was how to prevent the police from getting a sample of his DNA. In 2017, investigators compiled a list of 11 suspects, including Gary Shara. Each of them had declined to willingly provide a DNA sample after being interviewed at various points throughout the investigation. In reality, there were a lot more suspects on that list. But due to DNA phenotyping, detectives were able to exclude the wrong men. These men didn't fit some of the traits that experts got from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August of 2017, having been refused many times by the suspects on the list to provide their DNA, investigators had no other choice but to compile all available evidence and go to court. They asked the court for an order requiring all the 11 members on the compiled list of suspects to submit their DNA samples, to which the court granted their request. The cops visited Gary's apartment on Lathrop Street at Westfield Spring on September 13, 2017 to inform him of this order. But Gary wasn't at home. His roommate, with whom they shared the apartment, answered the door. The cops gave him their contact address. They also requested that he promptly pass the information to Gary Shara. The following day, an unexpected event took place. Gary Shara's then girlfriend called the cops and told them that Gary had left 3 letters in her house. To the investigators' surprise, when they opened the letters, Gary Shara had written in details his confession, a last will and testament, and a brief letter of apology to the Ziegert family. I've never really been or even felt normal. From a very young age, I was fascinated by abduction and bondage. I could never keep it too far from my mind for long. On that fateful day, I let myself do something terrible, Gary Shara wrote. In his letter, Gary Shara confessed that although he had no intention of killing Lisa, the situation had spiraled out of control. He admitted to having had several opportunities to turn himself in but confessed to being too much of a coward to do so. Shara revealed that he had lived with years of self-hatred. In the letter's conclusion, he made it clear that he intended to take his own life. Upon reading this, the police immediately began searching for Gary Shara. And soon, his car was found in the parking lot of a hospital in Stafford Springs. Another suicide note was placed on the windshield. It was soon discovered that Gary had taken some harmful drugs to kill himself. But he immediately got into his car and drove to the closest hospital, where the drugs were flushed out of his body system. After the doctors were done tending to him, Gary Shara was arrested and taken into custody. A search warrant for both his apartment and that of his girlfriend's was simultaneously issued by a judge. The police discovered numerous items that contained his DNA there. When these items were tested for a DNA sample, it was not surprising that Gary Shara was Lisa Ziegert's killer because the DNA found on the items in his home 100% matched the DNA sample found on Lisa Ziegert's body. Aside from this, investigators also had several other potentially important leads. Joyce MacDonald Shara, Gary's wife, who had first raised concerns about him in 1993, had sadly passed away in 2014. Investigators uncovered disturbing documents written by Gary Shara's wife's attorney, which provided alarming details. One day, Gary had told his wife bluntly that he couldn't engage in intimacy unless he was holding a knife. The day after Lisa's murder, the woman called her sister, revealing that Gary had returned home late that night with scratches all over his body and appeared visibly disturbed. Furthermore, Gary gave his wife a music box, claiming he had bought it from the same gift and card store where Lisa worked. These details added to the mounting suspicions surrounding Gary Shara. But according to Gary, it was an older woman who actually sold it to him. The issue is that there had never before been such an employee at the store. It is unclear why the police was not informed about all of these details in 1993. And it is impossible to find out now because the woman who had the information has died. Gary Shara kept declaring his innocence while in custody and refused to admit to his wrongdoings. He most likely acted out of pure fear. But with that much evidence against him, there was no way out for him to get away with his crimes. He only succeeded in delaying his sentence, and that was all. The trial wasn't scheduled to start for another 2 years, but Gary, who had been in prison the entire time, decided to confess to his crime. According to Massachusetts law, a defendant facing a first-degree murder charge faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa Ziegert's family and friends were present in the courtroom, including her mother, Dee Ziegert, who had spent 25 years hoping for answers about her daughter's murder. She expressed her gratitude to everyone involved in the investigation, as well as to the compassionate citizens who had supported her family throughout the years. While Lisa had finally received the justice she deserved, Dee acknowledged that emotional closure would never truly be attained. Lisa Ziegert's case being solved after 25 years is both a bittersweet and significant moment. It underscores the resilience of her family, especially her parents, who never gave up seeking justice for their daughter despite the long wait. While it brings a sense of closure and accountability with Gary Shara's life sentence, it's impossible to fully erase the pain and loss that Lisa's family and loved ones continue to carry. The case also highlights the importance of persistence in investigations and how advancements in DNA technology can ultimately bring justice, even when it seems elusive. It's a reminder of the long-lasting impact of such tragedies on families and communities, and the relentless pursuit of truth, no matter how much time has passed. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Watkins. On November 6, 1999, Jennifer Watkins failed to return home after her shift at Memorial Hospital, prompting her husband, Michael Watkins, to contact the Fountain Police Department and report her missing. That same day, Irene Skinner, Jennifer's mother, who cared for her grandchildren, reached out to the Colorado Springs Police Department after her daughter did not show up to pick them up. A missing person report was quickly initiated by the Colorado Springs Police Department. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives and patrol officers conducted several interviews with Jennifer's family members and co-workers. With Michael Watkins' assistance, they were able to locate Jennifer's car in an employee parking area near Printers Parkway and East Ikes Peak Avenue. The car was impounded, but no evidence or clues linking Jennifer Watkins' disappearance were found during the subsequent search. Investigators continued their efforts, conducting interviews with people at the Memorial Hospital where she worked. On November 8, 1999, while at the hospital, detectives received a call around 10 a.m. reporting the discovery of a body behind a stairwell in a section of the hospital still under construction. 2 Dover elevator service workers, who had entered the stairwell on the 8th level to inspect and repair an elevator shaft, were struck by a strong, unpleasant odor as they approached the area. When the elevator staff peered under the stairwell, they noticed what appeared to be the outline of a body bound with duct tape and covered in plastic. On request, the scene was immediately visited by investigators from the Colorado Springs Police Department Homicide Unit, Metro Crime Lab, and the El Paso County Coroner's Office. After the investigators removed the plastic, they found a deceased white female adult with brown hair. The victim was dressed in a purple blouse, black slacks, and a teal uniform smock. Her clothing was laid out in a way that suggested a sexual assault had taken place. Detectives questioned a number of workers and contractors at Memorial Hospital throughout the course of the investigation. No suspect was found despite looking into more potential suspect leads. The deceased adult female's autopsy was soon completed by the El Paso County Coroner's Office, and she turned out to be 23 years old Jennifer Watkins, who suddenly went missing a few days back. According to David Bowerman, the coroner for El Paso at the time, Jennifer had died of blunt force trauma to the head. Her death was determined to be a homicide. The question of who killed Jennifer Watkins bugged the police and her family for years. Jennifer Lee Watkins was born on the November 24, 1975 to William and Irene Skinner in Methuen, Massachusetts. She was the second of 4 children, and Joseph, her youngest brother, held a special place in her heart. Jennifer obtained her high school diploma from Hanover, Colorado High School. She enjoyed socializing with friends and caring for her pets. Jennifer loved playing volleyball and wished to help people. Her love for music made her join the school band as a clarinetist. Jennifer Watkins desired a career as a nurse. She and her husband, Michael Watkins, married on the April 8, 1995. And roughly 3 years later, Michael was hired as a maintenance worker at the Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. Not long after, Jennifer was also hired there as a dietitian. The investigators worked tirelessly to bring justice to Jennifer's family. As part of the crime scene processing, a close inspection of the plastic used to wrap Jennifer Watkins' body turned up some hairs, fibers, and a yellow whitish stain that was eventually identified as cement. At the autopsy, further biological evidence was also gathered. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation received a number of pieces of evidence for analysis. In addition to the victim's DNA profile, 2 other DNA profiles were created from the evidence items submitted for processing. The plastic wrap, the victim's pants, and semen samples taken at the autopsy were used to create these profiles. Although the semen found in Jennifer Watkins' pants and in the plastic wrap matched each other, they did not match the sample taken during the autopsy. A number of potential suspects had their biological samples taken, and all of them had been exonerated because their DNA did not match the 2 unidentified DNA samples. Although there were security cameras installed all over the hospital facility, the pictures were too blurry to be of much help. Police originally concentrated on those with access to the crime site, but there were no leads. They then shifted concentration on Michael Watkins, who worked night shift in the hospital's housekeeping division. Irene Skinner, Jennifer Watkins' mother, had her doubts about Michael. According to Irene, her daughter's life took a different turn after she moved in with her husband, Michael Watkins, whom she had attended grade school with. Irene Skinner reported that Michael Watkins struggled with drug use, and more often than not, Jennifer required multiple visits to the emergency as a result of domestic abuse. Also, in addition to his volatile personality and tumultuous relationship with Jennifer, Michael Watkins had wrought ends with the law in the past, which involved criminal mischief and a Peloton incident. He was, however, interrogated multiple times as the investigation progressed, and he complied fully with all the proceedings. Michael admitted he had an affair with Jennifer since one of the DNA found on Jennifer Watkins' body came from him. He, however, denied killing her. After obtaining a warrant, they searched Michael Watkins' home and discovered a pair of pants that seemed to be covered in blood. An analysis of the object revealed that it was blood, but it was Michael's blood. The 2 DNA samples that were taken from the crime scene didn't provide any answers. Even if the one from Jennifer's body matched Michael's DNA, it didn't raise a red flag because Michael was married to Jennifer. The other DNA sample from the plastic was unknown. The police asked Michael Watkins to take a polygraph test to which he consented and passed. Even though Michael was still a suspect, the detectives looked at other possibilities. They focused on a male hospital employee who mysteriously left town without warning or collecting his final salary immediately after the murder of Jennifer. During investigation, detectives soon discovered that the man was on probation for a murder in Louisiana, which he claimed was self-defense. When authorities located him, he rejected all accusations of involvement in Jennifer Watkins' murder and consented to provide a DNA sample. His DNA, however, didn't match the DNA discovered at the crime site where Jennifer was killed. Following a thorough investigation, no suspect was found, and the case eventually became cold. Numerous investigators have been trying to identify a suspect in Jennifer Watkins' case for the past 21 years without success. Jennifer's case remained unresolved for a while. Over the years, technological advancements in familial DNA analysis occurred. Between 2017 and 2018, cold case investigators with the help of Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based DNA technology business, used DNA phenotyping to determine the physical characteristics and ancestry of the unidentified DNA evidence at the crime scene. The suspect traits was predicted using the DNA evidence found in Jennifer Watkins' pants. Parabon made an individual prediction of the suspect's ancestry, eye color, hair color, skin tone, freckling, and face shape. A snapshot composite was created by combining these physical characteristics to show what the suspect would have looked like at age 25, and with an average body mass index of 22. Due to the fact that age and body mass index cannot be established from DNA, these default values were utilized. In an effort to generate leads, these photos were subsequently released to the public. The findings showed that the murderer had fair skin, blue or green eyes, blonde or brown hair, and was around 25 years old when the crime occurred. However, investigators were able to focus on a person who police had actually interrogated in 1999 after using genetic genealogy to narrow down the suspect. The killer was Ricky Sievert. According to a check of the original case report, Ricky Sievert, who was 29 at the time of the murder, was questioned by investigators on November 19, 1999 as a part of the initial homicide investigation. He was employed by Memorial Hospital and was a member of the maintenance team. He started working there in April 1998. According to Ricky Sievert's work schedule that he provided during his interview, on November 5, 1999, the day Jennifer Watkins was last seen, he would have been working a swing shift. Additionally, he denied ever having met Jennifer Watkins when asked. Finally, the culprit has been identified, but sadly, further investigation revealed that on November 2, 2001, 2 years after Jennifer Watkins' murder, Ricky Sievert was killed in a car accident on Highway 94, just east of Colorado Springs. The investigators, however, obtained DNA samples from the suspect's living relatives. According to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the proportion of the population that may be excluded as a contributor to the DNA gathered in this case is 99.994%. It means Ricky Sievert cannot be excluded. The 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office received the Jennifer Watkins case on October 1, 2020 for examination. The District Attorney's Office is certain that Ricky Sievert killed Jennifer Watkins. The investigation into the murder of Jennifer Watkins will be closed as exceptionally cleared, due to the death of the offender, Ricky Sievert, who passed away in a car accident in 2001. After all these years, we are grateful to finally provide Jennifer Watkins' family with the answers they deserve. Regardless of the time that has passed, we remain committed to serving this community. I am proud of the cold case detectives who, over the past 21 years, have never stopped working. For Ms. Watkins, they never lost sight of what was most important, finding the truth for the Watkins family. We also extend our gratitude to our partners who assisted in this case. We would not have been able to solve this case without your time, skill, and dedication, said Colorado Springs Police Department Chief Vince Nisk. Moving on to the next case. Cheyenne Cluss. Cheyenne Cluss, a 22-year-old from Chicago, was known for her vibrant and outgoing personality. Her social media was filled with selfies and memes that showcased her fun-loving spirit. However, her life took a difficult turn in January 2016, when her mother, with whom she was very close, passed away. To make matters worse, she also lost her beloved dog shortly after. These devastating losses left Cheyenne struggling emotionally during an incredibly tough time. On September 4, 2016, she posted on her Facebook, "Unfortunately, just lost another part of our family. My puppy Micah. I had the opportunity to have you as my best friend for 11 years of my life. Go get mom and keep her company up there. I love you." Cheyenne's emotional struggles were evident through her Facebook posts, where her depression and suffering became more apparent. During this time, she started spending time with individuals who weren't the best influence on her. One such person was 31-year-old Gabe Sadakase. Their relationship took a turn when both Cheyenne and Gabe were arrested. Cheyenne faced charges for obstructing identification and illegal transport of alcohol, while Gabe was charged with possession of a controlled substance. On the night of November 27, 2017, Cheyenne left her home with her laptop and a few pieces of clothing. She then went to the house of 38-year-old Brian Biddle. While there, Brian posted photos of Cheyenne on her Facebook. The two of them spent most of their time partying and drinking together. Early morning on November 29, 2017, a friend of Cheyenne named Chad Chanapai received a few texts and calls from Cheyenne. He woke up 20 minutes after her last message. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Chad saw that Cheyenne desperately wanted a lift from him, and that it seemed like she wanted to get out of Brian's house. Chad tried calling her, but there was no answer. He then called Brian, who told him that he slept for 18 hours after all the drinking, and when he woke up, Cheyenne was gone. The day of when she actually was reported missing does not seem to be known. Some sources stated that it was on December 1st, 2017, while others say it is December 11th or December 12th. It is known that Cheyenne's father was the one that reported her missing. On December 11th, 2017, a 911 call was made from Cheyenne's phone. The person who made the call immediately hung up. It is not known if it was Cheyenne who made the phone call or someone else using her phone. Police were able to trace the call to Mallard Lake Forest Preserve, about 20 miles from Brian's house. The police searched the area extensively. They found a couple of items, but nothing that could be linked to Cheyenne's disappearance at all. The police stated that Brian Biddle is not a suspect and that he has been cooperating with them. He let them search his home, phone, computer, and other personal devices. Many people believe that Brian is involved. He is a known drug addict. After Cheyenne disappeared, he was arrested for having a firearm and narcotics. He is also the last person to have seen her. There are also people who think that their friend, Chad Chenapai, might be involved in her disappearance. It appeared like he was friend-zoned and cared more for Cheyenne than she did for him. In his interview with Crime Watch Daily, he made it clear how he disliked the fact that Cheyenne was with other men like Brian and Gabe. It should also be noted that on the day the 911 call was made from Cheyenne's phone, Chad put up this post on his Facebook account. Also on his Facebook, you'll see that pretty much all of his posts are about Cheyenne, even before she disappeared. Then, on January 16, 2023, Cheyenne's family posted on social media that her remains had been found. Cheyenne's sister, Mariah Close, posted this on Facebook. Dear friends and family, on behalf of the Close family, we would like to extend our appreciation to the DuPage and Cook County Sheriff's Departments, as well as other agencies involved in the search for Cheyenne. We have been looking for Cheyenne and information related to her disappearance since she went missing 5 years ago. While it was not the news we were hoping for, we have received confirmation from law enforcement that Cheyenne's remains have been found. As her immediate family, father, sisters, brothers, nephews are in mourning, we ask for privacy as we grieve the unbearable loss of a daughter, sister, aunt, and a wonderful human being. The Cook County Sheriff's Office did not disclose the specific details about where or how Cheyenne Cluss remains were found. However, they confirmed that they worked closely with the DuPage County Sheriff's Office and the FBI to identify Cheyenne's remains through dental records. In a statement, the Sheriff's Office expressed their commitment to continuing the investigation in collaboration with Chicago police, while offering condolences and noting the closure this brings to the Close family. Moving on to the next case. Patricia and Lloyd Dwayne Bogle. On a chilly December evening in 1955, 16-year-old Patricia, a high school junior, attended her cousin's wedding. It was there that she first met 18-year-old airman Lloyd Dwayne Bogle. The moment they locked eyes, the attraction was immediate and undeniable. Their connection was electric, something that went beyond physical attraction. It was as if they had known each other for much longer, an instant bond that felt deep and profound. Within a month of dating, Patricia and Lloyd were already discussing marriage. They seemed inseparable, spending countless hours together, going on dates, and sharing their dreams of a future. On the evening of January 2, 1956, nearly a month after they first met, the young couple went to Pete's Drive-In restaurant for a romantic dinner in Great Falls, Montana. Witnesses reported seeing them leave the drive-in around 9 p.m., heading west on Central Avenue toward a well-known Lover's Lane near Wadsworth Park. That would be the last time anyone saw them. Neither Patricia nor Dwayne returned home, leaving a mystery in their wake. At precisely 9 p.m., Patricia and Dwayne departed Pete's Drive-In, their final sighting. When Patricia did not arrive home that night, her family concluded she had run away with Dwayne. Familiarity struck her parents. Patricia's oldest sister had similarly eloped at her age. Patricia's parents initially assumed she had eloped with Dwayne. However, as they pondered the situation, doubts began to creep in. The question lingered in their minds: why would she elope? Patricia was not the type of person to run away without telling anyone, and this only deepened their concern. She held an unwavering commitment to her studies, attending high school religiously. College dreams bloomed in her future. Moreover, she valued her curfew, never staying out late. This made her sudden absence even more confounding. And when they thought about Dwayne, he was more than just a passing acquaintance. Dwayne had been embraced as part of the family, and there was no apparent reason for them to elope. His stable position as a rising sergeant second class at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where he was assigned to the 29th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, further added to the mystery. His life appeared secure and promising, which made his sudden disappearance alongside Patricia even more perplexing. Together, the couple seemed to lack motives for running away. That same night, 2 women and 2 airmen crossed paths with a man sprawled between a car and a tree. Untroubled, they brushed it off, assuming the man was too drunk to drive and had collapsed beside his vehicle. A moment overlooked, a life ignored. The next morning, January 3, 1956, three young boys exploring the Great Falls area stumbled upon a grim sight. The remains of 18-year-old Lloyd Dwayne Bogle were discovered in a chilling scene. His body, twisted and partially concealed beneath a car, was found in the morning light. His wrists were bound with his own belt, and a fatal wound had pierced his skull. The car's ignition was still on, adding to the unsettling nature of the discovery. Headlights piercing the early morning darkness, a grim scene. Authorities, spurred by a coroner's examination, advised an autopsy. The chilling truth emerged. Dwayne had been shot, yet the bullet remained undiscovered. The search to find the missing bullet continued. It was a very important clue to catch the perpetrator. In a haunting revelation during the autopsy, it emerged that Dwayne was alive for several hours after being shot, adding layers to the tragedy. Patricia was nowhere to be found. The search for Patricia became paramount. A day passed, the January 5, 1956. Patricia's remains were discovered in a rocky ravine, not too far from Dwayne's. Fully clothed, perched at the edge of a steep embankment off an isolated highway in northwest Montana, 8 miles from Dwayne. No signs of robbery or assault were noticed in the initial investigation. A puzzling scene. An expensive camera in Dwayne's car. A $5 bill in his wallet. Patricia was not indecently assaulted. Motives questioned, motives unclear. There were no apparent signs suggesting Patricia was forcefully subjected to any forms of inappropriate violation when her remains were initially examined. However, during her autopsy, it became apparent that she had likely faced a distressing ordeal by an animalistic abuser. The news reports on the incident merely hinted at this, perhaps due to the sensitivity surrounding the matter during that era. Remember, it was the 1950s. Although DNA analysis was unavailable then, examiners carefully stored a swab for a future investigation. Additionally, evidence of multiple injuries implied a vicious struggle between Patricia and her assailant. On that very day, investigators formally questioned a potential suspect. This suspect, an airman who was friends with Dwayne, had their identity kept confidential. Patricia's mother had sensed Dwayne's distress a few days earlier, prompting a conversation where he expressed feeling troubled and unable to rid himself of constant grief. He confided about a recent disagreement with a friend. Many believed it was he whom the authorities questioned as a potential suspect. However, this suspect eventually fell out of suspicion. For more than 3 decades, the case remained unsolved without any substantial leads. In November of 1989, investigators made a pivotal decision to search for the bullet, turning their attention to a nearby tree. Cascade County Sheriff Barry Michelotti revealed the tree's significance, as this cottonwood potentially holds the bullet inside it, highlighting the tree's central role in the case. The recovery of this bullet held immense importance, aiming to uncover the weapon's caliber and possibly connect it to firearms seized in other incidents over the years, offering a potential breakthrough in the investigation. Sergeant Dick Duncan knew about the prior unsuccessful attempts to X-ray the tree because of the challenges posed by its immense size and bark density. Towering at approximately 80 feet with a trunk diameter of around 4.5 feet, this tree stood as an obstacle. But this time, they had an audacious plan to shave off approximately 33 growth rings from the lower portion, anticipating that this action might reveal traces of the bullet's path within the tree, a potential opening or tunnel, a silent witness to the past. Their plan paid off, and the authorities recovered the 33-year-old evidence. Optimism surged when investigators retrieved bullets from the cottonwood tree, reigniting hopes of uncovering the perpetrator. Yet these hopes were quickly dashed as the bullets failed to match with any firearm linked to other criminal activities. Despite the absence of significant breakthroughs, the investigation remained in motion, unwavering in its pursuit of every lead. A staggering 35 individuals were interrogated in connection to the case, showcasing the exhaustive efforts invested in seeking justice. Among the potential suspects in the case stood Edward Wayne Edwards, who had a criminal history dating back to 1956 when he was arrested in Montana for burglary. His criminal escapades intensified when he escaped from Akron prison in 1955, embarking on a spree of gas station robberies nationwide. By 1961, Edwards had secured a spot on the FBI's most wanted list, an honor he held until his capture in 1962. Following his release on parole in 1967, decades passed before he resurfaced in the legal spotlight. In 2009, he faced arrest once more, subsequently confessing in 2010 to brutally taking away the lives of Billy Lavaca, Judith Straub, Tim Hack, Kelly Drew, and Danny Lochner. All the victims were young adults close to the age of Dwayne and Patricia. His dark deeds extended further as he admitted to influencing a U.S. Army soldier, Danny Boy, to go AWOL before ending his life too and burying him in a shallow grave. Although sentenced to be executed in March 2, 2011 for his involvement in Danny Boyle's demise, Edward Wayne Edwards passed away in prison merely a month later due to natural causes, evading the full extent of justice for his string of heinous crimes. The link between Edwards and the tragic deaths of Dwayne and Patricia was rooted in his disturbing modus operandi. Edwards had a chilling pattern of targeting couples in lovers' lanes, eerily similar to the location where Patricia and Dwayne met their untimely end. This unsettling connection raised suspicions that Edwards could be involved in their deaths. Another suspect under investigation was James Joseph Whitey Bulger, a notorious criminal in the area. Bulger's criminal history, dating back to 1951, included an arrest related to a misconduct case involving a similar assault to the one suffered by Patricia. During the period when the tragic end of Patricia and Dwayne transpired, Bulger was documented to have been present in the area. However, despite his proximity to the crime scenes, no substantial evidence surfaced to conclusively implicate him in the incidents. As the passage of time dimmed any hope for fresh leads, the pursuit of the elusive perpetrator hit an impasse. However, in 2012, a glimmer of renewed hope emerged when Sergeant John Cadner, taking control as the head of detectives for the CCSO, was tasked with resurrecting this cold case. Sergeant Cadner knew the crucial importance of the DNA evidence extracted from a swab 56 years ago. This key sample, originally sent to the State Crime Lab in 2001 by Detective Phil Madison during his tenure, only proved the DNA did not match Dwayne's genetic profile. Therefore, it was cataloged in CODI's Combined DNA Index System. The database, unfortunately, it failed to yield any promising matches, leaving the case to go cold again. Sergeant Cadner teamed up with Bode Technology to recreate the DNA sample when he got the case. By 2019, they had successfully made the sample again. This time, they did not just compare it with the samples in CODI's. They also checked it against DNA from regular people in open-source DNA databases. These databases are used by people who want to learn about their family history. Just a year before, in 2018, the Golden State offender was caught because some of his family members had given their DNA to a similar open-source DNA database. This helped identify and arrest him. The sample Sergeant Cadner uploaded matched 3 individuals. Investigators reached out to them and their families. They collected DNA samples and found that an individual named Kenneth Gould was the closest match to the foreign DNA obtained from Patricia Schwab. Sergeant Cadner expressed, "This was amazing because after 65 years, we finally had a lead and a location to explore. Everything was just theories before this. Now we had a solid lead and a name." It completely shifted the case's dynamics. Authorities encountered a new hurdle. Kenneth Gould had passed away in 2007, and authorities could not exhume his remains to get a DNA sample. Kenneth Gould was cremated in 2007. This presented a challenge, yet they contacted Kenneth Gould's children explaining the situation and the case. Surprisingly, the children agreed to provide their DNA for comparison. Initially unsure of their response, investigators were pleasantly surprised by their full cooperation. Sergeant Cadner shared, "I was not certain how they would react when I approached them about their dad being a suspect. Kenneth Gould hailed from Great Falls and was recognized for riding his horses around the Vineyard Road area where Patricia's remains were discovered. Intriguingly, he had resided close to Patricia's parents at one point, yet there was no apparent link between him and either Patricia or Dwayne. Notably, when Gould was 25 years old, he married a 16-year-old, the same age Patricia was at the time of the slayings. A month after Patricia and Dwayne's tragic end, Gould abruptly altered the course of his life. He uprooted his entire existence, relocating his family first to Tracy, then to Geraldine, and later to Hamilton before eventually leaving the state of Montana entirely, settling in Missouri without any intention of returning. Kenneth Gould was deemed the most likely suspect in the slayings. However, because he had passed away, his culpability could not be conclusively established without a proper trial. Sergeant Cadner shared his view that, although they could not definitively prove Kenneth Gould's guilt due to his passing, the accumulated evidence strongly pointed to him as the prime suspect. He acknowledged that while they couldn't physically place the weapon in Gould's hand, the overall information and circumstances provided a high level of certainty in his involvement. Kenneth Gould's daughter subtly suggested to Sergeant Cadner that her father may have had hidden secrets, implying that there were aspects of his life that no one else knew about. Once Gould was identified as the suspect, the families of Dwayne Bogle and Patricia Kalitsky were finally approached, offering them the closure they had long sought. While they were relieved to receive answers after more than 6 decades, the revelation also reopened painful memories for the families, particularly those who had personal connections to the couple. Sergeant Cadner empathetically noted, "The families are experiencing a mix of emotions. It is a bittersweet moment." Dwayne and Patricia were vibrant and well-liked by many. Investigators invested deeply in this case, leaving a part of themselves in the pursuit of justice, which makes this closure heartfelt yet challenging. Patricia Kalitsky's sister, the sole surviving member of her family, had succumbed to advanced dementia by the time the identity of the perpetrator was revealed. The Bogle family had endured years of turmoil with speculations about Dwayne's fate, including unverified rumors linking him to the mob. Dwayne's niece, Karen Bogle McCarthy, who was 54 at the time of the revelation, reflected on the impact of modern technology on their generation. She acknowledged that while technological advancements had their merits, they also reignited deeply buried wounds that had started to heal. In an interview, Edgar Wilson, Kenneth Gould's neighbor for a decade in Missouri, expressed utter disbelief about the accusations against Gould. Wilson described Gould as mild-mannered, not confrontational, and inherently good, portraying him as a genuinely good person who did not engage in vices like drinking or causing trouble. During his time in Missouri, Gould resided on a farm with his family, earning respect as an exceptional horse trainer. He also tended to sheep and goats at his farm. An unsubstantiated theory is that Kenneth Gould secretly loved Patricia, and when all of a sudden Patricia fell for Dwayne, and only after a month of dating they were thinking of marrying, is when Kenneth decided to take the matters into his own hands. He confronted the couple on the Lover's Lane, and when he saw the couple involved in intimacy in the car, it enraged Kenneth Gould, and he held the couple at gunpoint. He tied up Dwayne with his own belt and threatened him to leave Patricia. The theory that Kenneth Gould could have been motivated by an obsession with Patricia raises several intriguing but troubling questions. The significant age gap between Kenneth and Patricia, almost 13 years, does seem unusual, especially considering the societal norms and personal dynamics at the time. However, it is worth noting that Kenneth had married his wife when she was 16 years old, just 4 years before the tragedy involving Patricia. This fact could suggest a pattern of behavior or a predisposition toward younger women, which complicates the investigation into his possible involvement. The irregularities in the theory, particularly the timing and his history of marrying a much younger woman, add to the complexity of understanding the true motive behind Patricia's abduction and murder. The details of his relationship with his wife and how it might have influenced his actions toward Patricia provide a troubling backdrop that could point to unresolved psychological or emotional issues. Ultimately, these elements suggest that the case might involve deeper, more personal motivations tied to Gould's own life and actions. But without further evidence, these theories remain speculative. Kenneth Gould's daughter's words about hidden secrets carry a weight of uncertainty. Was she implying that her father had an undisclosed obsession with Patricia, or was it merely a passing reflection on the complexities of human nature? Without further insight into her statement, it remains a haunting ambiguity. The motive behind the crime remains elusive, especially with the passing of 3 individuals who could have provided clarity. Was the murder the result of a love triangle gone wrong, or did it stem from a moment of uncharacteristic violence from someone who otherwise seemed benign? The question also lingers, was it the act of one perpetrator, or did others play a role in this brutal crime? With the passing of those who might have unraveled these mysteries, these questions remain unanswered, leaving the case shrouded in the shadows of uncertainty. Moving on to the next case. Christine Jessup. In the peaceful, tight-knit community of Queensville, Ontario, the small town had an idyllic sense of safety, with familiar faces and unlocked doors. Parents like Janet Jessup often allowed their children to play outside without worry, trusting that their small town would keep them safe. On Wednesday, October 3, 1984, Janet didn't feel the need to rush home to greet her 9-year-old daughter, Christine Jessup, when school let out. Life in Queensville was so tranquil that such a routine felt entirely normal, until Christine never came home that day. Christine Jessup was an adventurous and independent child, full of curiosity and imagination. She enjoyed exploring the graveyard behind her home, spending hours lost in her own world. Like her older brother Kenny, Christine had a passion for baseball, but her true love was for animals. She found comfort and companionship in her dog, Freckles, and even kept a pet frog named Harold, which she housed in the damp, earthy basement of her home. Christine's playful spirit and love for animals painted a picture of a young girl with a deep sense of wonder and attachment to the world around her. On October 3, 1984, Christine Jessup returned home from school, filled with excitement to share her impressive music class records with her mother and brother. She knew that her father, Bob Jessup, would not be home, as he was serving an 18-month jail term for defrauding elderly family friends and was incarcerated at the Toronto East Detention Center. Upon entering the family's 2-story farmhouse, Christine quickly realized that neither her mom nor her brother was home. Despite this, her cheerful demeanor likely remained as she awaited their return, unaware of the tragic events that were about to unfold. Christine wasn't overly concerned. She found a coin in the change jar and decided to head to the nearby store to buy a pack of gum. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Earlier that day, she had made plans to meet her friend, Leslie Chipman, at the park just across the street from the store around 4 p.m. At exactly 4 p.m., Christine arrived at the park, excited to meet her friend, unaware that this would be the last time she was seen. As planned, Leslie Chipman went to the park and waited for Christine to show up. Meanwhile, 10 minutes past 4 p.m., Janet Jessup arrived home with her son, Kenny. She noticed Christine's red bicycle lying on its side outside the home, and its kickstand was damaged. Upon entering the house, they noticed that Christine's jacket was hanging on a hook that was higher than she could normally reach. The mail and newspaper had been brought inside, and her school bag was placed neatly on the counter. As the sun began to set around 5 p.m., Christine still hadn't returned home, which was unusual for her. This raised immediate concerns, as she was typically prompt and dependable. A panicked Janet decided to go look for her in the areas she loved to hang out. She went to the park and the graveyard, calling out her daughter's name. She placed the call through to Christine's friends, not excluding Leslie Chipman. Leslie, however, told Janet that she had planned a park date with Christine, but she never showed up, so she went home after waiting for hours. On hearing this, Janet tried so hard not to panic, but it seemed impossible. Janet felt a deep sense of unease. She and Christine shared a close bond, doing everything together. Though she allowed her children some freedom, she always knew where they were. Now, as the hours passed with no word from Christine, she began to regret not being home in time to greet her daughter after school. That feeling of unease quickly grew into a sharp worry, as something just didn't feel right. Just 20 minutes of delay was all it took for Christine, her sweet, sensitive, feisty, adorable daughter, to disappear with no trace. The day was getting dark, and Janet decided to call the York Regional Police for help. At the time, children going missing was a common case, but the cases were always solved with answers provided within 48 hours. Parental abduction or child runaway was more often than not the usual explanation for a missing child at the time, but in the case of Christine Jessup, both scenarios did not make any sense. I mean, both of her parents were accounted for, and Christine was never a type of child to run away from home. Back then, whenever Christine went to spend a weekend with her grandparents, she would always call home to hear her family's voices and say hello. In the 1980s, the York police force was small, with only one officer for every 860 residents. There were no specialized units for major crimes, and the force had never dealt with a case involving child kidnapping or murder. Their inexperience quickly became evident as they took on the case, leading to complications in the investigation from the outset. According to reports, when a police arrived at the Jessup's house, he removed Christine Jessup's jacket from the hook for closer inspection. Investigators were also said to have come in through the back and side doors of the house. The plastic bag used to wrap the newspaper was also thrown in the trash without being checked for fingerprints, which could possibly belong to the killer. Also, the Jessup's home was not restricted as a crime scene, as neighbors were seen coming in and out of the home, unintentionally touching one or two things that might have compromised any kind of crucial evidence if Christine Jessup had been abducted from her home. The police set up a search party which also included residents of Queensville to help carry out a series of random searches of the area. The search yielded no results. Christine was never found. It was as if she had vanished from the surface of the earth without a trace. Her disappearance shocked the people of Queensville, who were used to looking out for one another. The community was left in disbelief, wondering how a 9-year-old girl could simply disappear without a single clue. According to Mark Johnson, one of the search party volunteers, the residents of Queensville were full of anxiety and concern. In her words, she said, "There is a feeling of disbelief that something like this could happen here." Due to how severe the situation was, Bob Jessup was later released from jail on humanitarian grounds. Bob and Janet then pleaded with the public to help in their daughter's return. The police knew that kidnappings are not just done randomly. The police believed that Christine Jessup's abduction was likely committed by someone who had an existing connection with the family. They asked the Jessups to provide a list of people who had access to their home when no family members were around. One of the names provided was Calvin Hoover, a close family friend who worked with Bob Jessup. Just a day after Christine's disappearance, Calvin's wife, Heather Hoover, traveled to Queensville to offer comfort and support to Janet, helping the family in any way she could. Sergeant Raymond Bunce of the York Police had an interview with Heather. Her alibi was that she was at her workplace on the day of Christine Jessup's disappearance. When asked about the whereabouts of her husband on that day, she said Calvin Hoover had been at work too. After responding to every question thrown at her, Heather took permission to leave, telling the officer that her husband and her children were home waiting for her, and that she needed to hurry home. However, Calvin Hoover was never interviewed. Calvin Hoover was a man with dark hair, protruding front teeth, and a slim face, which appeared even slimmer when he wore his oversized glasses. At the time of Christine Jessup's murder, he was a 28-year-old tradesman from Scarborough with a penchant for drinking, partying, and gambling. Despite his flaws, Hoover had a certain charm that filled the room when he entered. To strangers and coworkers, he appeared friendly, but those who knew him more intimately described him as a selfish person, more concerned with his own interests than others. He also had a tendency toward revenge, a trait that became evident to his close family and friends. Calvin Hoover met his wife, Heather, in the mid-1970s. After they got married, Calvin adopted Heather's 2 boys, and later they had 2 more boys together. Their small home was located in a housing development just west of the Toronto Zoo. Calvin and Heather Hoover worked at Eastern Independent Telecom, a small communications firm in Markham that supplied telephone wiring for businesses all over the area. While Heather worked in the dispatch department, Calvin worked in the installations under Bob Jessup, Christine's father, who was the lead installer at the time. Calvin Hoover's job, which allowed him to move around freely, gave him the opportunity to leave work for hours at a time without providing an explanation. Over time, he developed a close friendship with Bob Jessup, and the two families frequently gathered for barbecues and birthday parties. Janet and Heather also grew close, forming a strong bond and finding in each other a best friend. Janet had even nicknamed Heather. She jokingly called her the Goofy Newfie. Also, Heather Hoover would many a times babysit Christine Jessup, who often called her Auntie Heather. Regardless of the 50 kilometers distance between the two families' homes, Janet and Heather would frequently meet to catch up over a pot of tea and watch their children play. They had even had one of such visit 2 days before Christine disappeared. On the October 1st, 1984, Janet Jessup took her 2 kids, Kenny and Christine, to go visit the Hoovers. Lately, she had been exhausted, taking care of 2 children while her husband was in jail. She needed moral support and felt her friend, Heather, could give her some encouraging words. When she arrived at the Hoovers' home, Janet told Heather that she and Kenny would be going to visit Bob in jail in 2 days. It is however possible that Calvin Hoover overheard Janet's conversation with his wife and knew Christine would be home alone. Or maybe Heather Hoover had innocently told Calvin what Janet had said about going to visit her husband with Kenny. Either way, 2 days later, on the October 3rd, 1984, Calvin Hoover decided to do the unthinkable. The theory was that since Christine Jessup knew Calvin Hoover as a family friend, she probably entered his car without much convincing. He probably told her he was driving her to where her family was, which of course, she would have been excited about. Days went by without the Jessup's family, and the police knowing that the culprit was right under their noses. The case went cold for a while, and all the Jessups did was to pray for the safe return of their daughter and sister. Christmas came, but without Christine around, the Jessup's house didn't feel like celebrating. No Christmas tree, and Kenny only got few presents. By the time it was December 31st, 1984, 3 months later, while people prepared to enter into the new year, in the village of Sunderland, just 56 kilometers east of Queensville, a man named Fred Patterson and his 2 daughters had gone looking for their dog on the large, wooded property next to their house. A while later, Patterson could spot something unfamiliar that looked like a heap of garbage beside a half-dug pit. On getting closer, he realized with horror that it was a badly decomposed corpse of a little girl. The corpse had suffered deep, multiple stab wounds to the chest, and these, according to the medical examiner, were later determined to be the official cause of death. The body wore a beige turtleneck sweater with a blue pullover, and a blouse with missing buttons. Close to the body's right foot was a pair of little girl's panties. A recorder which had the name, Christine Jessup, written on it, was also found laying in the tall grass. When Christine's family heard the sad news, they became inconsolable. Their painful waiting and wondering had come to an end, but now, there is a lifetime of mourning ahead. Since body was found in Durham region, the case was transferred from the York Police to the Durham Regional Police, where Inspector Robert Brown then began handling the case. Questions such as why Christine's body was found in Sunderland bugged the police. Sunderland was all country roads, farmland and forests, which was not really far or close from Queensville. The police was not aware that Calvin Hoover must have chosen that area to commit his atrocities because of his familiarity with the area. He was said to have had a school friend who lived just a few kilometers away from the crime scene. Calvin and his friend would often meet to go kayaking and backcountry camping. Calvin already knew the area like the palm of his hands. He chose to take Christine few meters into the dense forest where he would not be interrupted or seen by passing motorists. Inspector Brown worked day and night on the case. He divided his detectives into 2 teams. They worked tirelessly to find the culprit. They followed all leads except the accumulated boxes of notes containing leads from the York Regional Police investigation. This box had a notebook in which the name and address of Calvin Hoover was written, but investigators from the Durham Regional Police disregarded the work of the York Regional Police, saying their efforts to the case was amateurish and a waste of time. They, however, followed all other leads like the family friend who had uttered strange dark sayings, a kid in the neighborhood who always carried a knife, and even Jane Jessup, but none of these leads gave the answers they wanted. During the investigation, Calvin Hoover's name never came up. On February 14, 1985, Fitz and Shep, who were detectives in one of the teams assigned to the case, visited Christine's family and asked for another list of suspects, people they think could have harmed their daughter. The Jessups, however, could not easily name anyone, but the detectives pressed harder. Just over the fence of their home lived a tight-knit family called the Morans. They had a 25-year-old young boy named Guy Paul. He was kind and respectful and had no criminal record. Guy Paul was never one to drink or smoke. The only law violations he had were only a couple of speeding tickets. However, Janet recollected that Guy Paul did not participate in the search for Christine Jessup when almost everyone in Queensville had. Guy Paul, who played the clarinet and kept honeybees, was regarded as a weird type of guy by the detectives. The Morans were practically good with handiworks. The Moran family, known for their kindness and trustworthiness, was well regarded in the neighborhood. Alphonse Moran, the father, was a retired engineer, Army veteran, and college instructor who preferred to handle all home repairs himself, often with the help of his 6 children. A few weeks before Christine Jessup disappeared, Janet Jessup had asked the Morans if she could list their name and address as an emergency contact for Christine at school. Alphonse Moran gladly agreed. Guy Paul Moran was the second youngest of the Moran children. He possessed the same intelligence as his father. Alphonse taught Guy Paul to weld when he was just 10 years of age. He would often ask his son to assemble some mechanical clocks he had intentionally scattered. They often worked together fixing cars at their backyard. Guy Paul was a young man who loved woodworking and unraveling puzzle-like problems that required patience and focus. He possessed a photographic memory. He often retained the serial numbers of his favorite possessions in case they got stolen. By the time Christine Jessup went missing, Guy Paul was in 3 bands. He loved music and was a prodigy on the clarinet. On February 22, 1985, detectives Fitz and Shep went over to the Morans and engaged Guy Paul in a conversation. He was invited into their car for a casual chat. Guy Paul was asked how well he knew Christine Jessup. He said he did not know her that well. He said there was a huge age gap between the both of them. Christine was more than 16 years his junior, so they never had much cause for interaction. He claimed to have once helped her catch Freckles, her dog, who was running loose. He also recalled talking about gardening to her. And the last interaction he ever had with the Jessups was when he had gone over to help relight the pilot on their furnace. The investigators questioned him about his whereabouts on the day Christine disappeared. Moran said he had been at work, a furniture manufacturing facility at Steeles and Weston, 57 kilometers to the south. However, detectives Fitz and Shep later discovered that Guy Paul had left work early around 3:32 p.m. That meant he could have returned home no earlier than 4:14 p.m., which appeared to be too late to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet and Kenny got home at 4:10 p.m. They further asked him why he never helped with the search for Christine. Guy Paul Moran said that if Christine's family had asked him, he would have gladly joined in the search, but, at the time, he and his father were installing weeping tile around the home's foundation. Guy Paul's explanation made sense and his alibi was rock solid, but Fitz and Shep saw him as a suspect who was guilty. The detectives further engaged Guy Paul in a playfully conversation, asking him what he thought about Christine Jessup. Guy Paul Moran described her as sweet and innocent. However, he innocently added the statement, "But they sometimes grow up to be corrupt," which in a general sense, he is right. As girls become adults, they lose their childlike innocence. But to the detectives, Guy Paul had an evil motive to tarnish Christine's innocence. After their conversation, Guy Paul went home and continued with his normal life. In weeks following Christine Jessup's murder, Calvin Hoover kept his mouth shut. He had the guts to also show up for Christine's funeral and wake, blending with the crowd and offering his condolences to the family. Calvin Hoover was detectives' worst nightmare. He had no criminal background and did not show any form of perverseness. He was not loud or boastful. He made sure he did not draw attention to himself. He seemed careful enough not to have been seen picking up Christine Jessup after school, but at the same time, Calvin Hoover perpetrated his crime in a hurry that he had left a trail of leads. His semen was on Christine's panties, and a single dark hair was found in her necklace. The hair strand was taken to the forensic for testing, but with the intention of finding a match to Guy Paul's DNA. Guy Paul Moran, who had gone to his jazz group for rehearsals, was told that the band leader's daughter, accompanied by her friend and classmate, who happened to be an undercover police officer, was doing a cosmetics class project on hair analysis. She asked people in the jazz group if they would not mind her plucking a few strands of everyone's hair. Guy Paul Moran, who loved her eyes, did not even mind at all. She plucked everyone's hair but later discarded them except for Moran's. The undercover police then handed over Moran's hair to her colleagues Fitz and Shep, who took it to the Center of Forensic Sciences for DNA testing. The forensic scientist never really engaged in any DNA testing. She only microscopically compared the hair color from Christine's necklace to Moran's, and concluded that the match was consistent. This was all Detective Shep and Fitz needs to arrest the wrong guy. In the evening of April 22, 1985, Guy Paul Moran was on his way to band practice when he saw police flashing lights in his rear view mirror. He thought he was being pulled over because he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He did not have an idea that 14 other police officers were around the area. 2 cops approached his car, and he was surprised to recognize the detectives he had spoken to about Christine Jessup's weeks before. Thinking it was nothing to stress about, he greeted them, "What's up, guys?" In response, Fitz and Shep told him they were arresting him for the murder of Christine Jessup. A baffled Moran exclaimed, "What? It seems you're describing a dramatic turn of events in the story." As Guy Paul Moran was brought in for questioning, he realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. In his mind, he had made an honest mistake, but now he was facing the full force of the law for a crime he had no part in. Meanwhile, Calvin Hoover, likely keeping tabs on the investigation into Christine Jessup's murder, picked up the newspaper 2 days after Moran's arrest and was shocked to see the headline, "Musician who lives next door charged with Christine Jessup murder." This could be a turning point as Hoover's connection to the case deepens, and the true culprit is yet to be revealed. I bet at that point, he was relieved to see that the search for the real killer would stop for a while or even forever. His wife, Heather Hoover, who had kept a photo of Christine that the little girl had given her, often visited her at the cemetery. During her visit, Calvin would stay by her side, giving out words of comfort as she mourned. After Moran's arrest, Bob and Janet Jessup were shocked by the news that their daughter's killer had been just over the fence of their home. In an interview with the media, Janet said, "Last summer, they came over and gave us honey from their bees. They were so good to us. That's why it's such a shock." For Detectives Fitz and Shep, the easy part of finding a suspect was done. The difficult part was finding strong evidence that could convict Guy Paul Moran for Christine Jessup's murder. They reviewed Moran's rock-solid alibi and concluded that he couldn't have traveled the 57 kilometers from work to his home in time to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet and Kenny arrived home at 4:10 p.m. They then retraced Janet and Kenny's route on the day Christine went missing and suggested that Janet must have forgotten the exact time she came home. Janet, however, denied forgetting because she immediately looked at the wall clock when she walked into the house. As time went by, the detective's constant pressure eventually made her review her timing. She then said she returned home around 4:35 p.m. At trial, the prosecutor tabled flimsy evidence just to crown Guy Paul Moran as the murderer he is not. A cigarette butt that was found next to Christine's body was almost presented as an evidence until investigators realized that Moran never smoked. The Moran family, however, told the court that their son had not arrived home on the day Christine went missing until 5:30 p.m., and that was because he had stopped for groceries and gas after work. But a psychologist who interviewed the Moran family testified that they were a part of a secretive, protective, pathological family system. The police planted an undercover police sergeant named Gordon Hobbs in Moran's cell. He came back to court days later with untrue stories. He said Moran had made stabbing motions toward his own chest, demonstrating the way he had killed Christine Jessup. As if that wasn't enough, Gordon Hobbs also allegedly said that Moran had confessed by saying that he would red rum the innocent. According to Moran, this story was horribly twisted. He said Hobbs had asked him what his favorite movie was and he had told him about the 80 horror film named The Shining. in which a little boy repeatedly croaks red rum in the scariest scene of the movie. Red rum is the backwards spelling of murder. Since Moran couldn't remember the title of the movie at the time, he referenced red rum instead. This allegation appeared to seal the fate of Moran to the extent that his lawyer was afraid they would lose the case. After the first trial phase, he was declared not guilty, but with no other suspect and the people of Queensville being afraid for their children's life, the verdict was appealed and he was then scheduled for another trial. This time, Moran, who was then 32 years, was however sentenced to life in prison. The judge asked him if he had any comment. Moran repeated the same thing he had been saying since the day he was arrested on the way to his band practice. In his words, Moran said, "I am not guilty of this crime. It's a travesty of justice what's happened today. I'm appealing." Moran was however handcuffed and taken to the Elgin Middlesex Detention Centre in London, where he stayed for a while until he was brought to the federal prison. During the time Guy Paul Moran was given a life sentence, Calvin Hoover and his family lived in a 2-story home in Oshawa and were slowly drowning in debt. In the year 1991, Calvin Hoover had declared bankruptcy, owing $28,000 against assets of just $11,000. Aside this, he battled different diseases which included undiagnosed bipolar disorder, depression, and panic attacks. He would often use alcohol and drugs for temporary relief. While Guy Paul Moran was imprisoned, other inmates saw him as the bigger sinner compared to all of them because he was convicted of child rape and murder, and they all wanted to deal with him for such convictions. Luckily for him, the most feared inmate had listened to his story and believed he was innocent. He then told other inmates not to lay their hands on Moran. Even at that, his life was still in danger. He was getting threats from every corner of the prison. He could not go anywhere without the most powerful inmates. Moran passed time in prison reading geography books that made him imagine he was traveling around the world and not stuck in one position. In 1993, while some people believed he committed the crime, majority of the people in Ontario believed he was innocent and should be freed on bail. Moran had a glimmer of hope again. He then hired a new lawyer, James Lockyer, and a co-counsel, Joanne McLean. Moran was granted bail in February 1993 after his lawyer successfully filed for appeal. At that point, Moran had spent 2.5 years in courtrooms and almost 18 months locked away in 6 different facilities. His parents, Alphonse and Ida Moran, had mortgaged their home many times in order to keep up with their son's legal bills, which amounted to roughly $500,000. Guy Paul Moran's appeal was set to begin in January of 1995. His lawyers went over his previous trials and at a point, they became aware of the significant breakthroughs in DNA. All evidence gathered from Christine's crime scene were tested again. Christine's panties alongside Moran's DNA were sent to a forensic lab. Few days before the trial, there was news from the lab saying the semen on Christine's panties does not match Guy Paul Moran's DNA. 3 days later, after this was confirmed, Moran was proven innocent and set free. All charges against him were dropped and his criminal record wiped. Guy Paul Moran was given a sum of $1,200,000 in settlement by the Ontario government. He could have gotten more if he had pursued a trial, but he had been in enough courtrooms and knew how slow the system is. It would have taken him years to receive a settlement. Calvin Hoover, increasingly paranoid and consumed by fear, couldn't shake the thought that the walls were closing in on him. His habitual trips to the local pubs to drown his anxieties became his only solace. But even then, he couldn't escape the dread that came with knowing that Guy Paul Moran's acquittal meant the search for the real killer would soon intensify. Hoover's mind raced, haunted by the knowledge that his careless actions at the crime scene had left behind crucial evidence that DNA science could soon uncover. Regret gnawed at him as he recalled not having disposed of Christine Jessup's body properly, a mistake he would soon come to regret even more. With every passing day, the pressure mounted, and Hoover knew it was only a matter of time before the police came for him. By 1996, Calvin Hoover and his family had moved to a low-rent housing complex in Ajax. Their marriage was threatening to break up. At this point, the Hoovers were no longer in contact with Bob and Janet Jessup, who had divorced. Calvin Hoover got deep into gambling and doing drugs. One night, he had gotten drunk and had crashed his truck. He was charged with a DUI and his license was confiscated for a year. This was the last straw for Heather Hoover, who soon divorced him. Calvin Hoover continued chasing work, women, gambling, and drugs. He had a strong relationship with his coworker from Burlington named Joanne Rocca. They both shared a likeness for gambling and had strong connection. In 2003, they got married in Las Vegas. However, his happiness was short-lived as Joanne died of natural causes in 2009, not having the opportunity to know what kind of monster her husband was. Calvin Hoover was haunted by so many demons. He had sleepless nights, tortured thoughts, depressive episodes, and panic attacks. It was too much that he attempted to end it all in 2014. He tried committing suicide by motor vehicle, but he survived it. Steve Smith, a Toronto police detective, was a 13-year-old kid in 1984 when Christine Jessup was murdered. Smith, who grew up in Hamilton, playing all sort of games with his best friends, could remember when Christine Jessup went missing, and after many years, he still couldn't get his mind off the case. In the year 1996, he joined the Toronto Police and had since then helped solve some of the worst cases in the country. When Smith was transferred to the Homicides Department in 2019, he quickly showed interest in cold cases. In his words, he said, "These families have waited so long for answers." Since the Durham Police had flawed the Christine Jessup's case, it was transferred to the Toronto Police. Smith brought in more staff to assist with the case. They followed so many leads and struck out lists of 300 people through DNA. Nothing worked. However, in May 2019, Smith heard about a 2-week forensic genealogy seminar being held at the Ontario Police College. Smith did not know much about forensic genealogy, but he knew the process was successfully used a year earlier to solve a case. Before now, the process of forensic genealogy had never been tested in Canada, but when Smith received authorization from Toronto Police to try out genetic testing on a cold case, he opted for the Christine Jessup's case. Smith then submitted the DNA from Christine's underwear to Othram Inc., a Texas-based genetic testing firm, which generated a profile and uploaded it to a database called GEDmatch. They began fletching out a family tree to narrow down the suspect. This process was time and money consuming, but Detective Smith never gave up. After turning a family maze into a family tree of 33,000 descendants, the genealogist was however able to pinpoint Calvin Hoover as the owner of the sperm on Christine's underwear. Smith could not recognize the name. He went through Christine's case file and saw that he was never mentioned as a suspect. Hoover knew the Jessup's family so well and often had access to their homes, but the police never interviewed him for over 3 decades. Smith typed Calvin Hoover's name into 2 different police databases called CPIC and Versadex to figure out where he lived and whether he had a criminal record. However, Detective Steve Smith soon learned that Calvin Hoover had died in 2015. For years before Steve Smith joined the Homicide Department, Calvin Hoover, who lived outside of Port Hope in a small bungalow with one of his sons, was a sad, anxious, isolated man. At a point, his doctor had prescribed him a depressant called clonazepam for his anxiety and panic attacks, but it never worked. According to one of his sons, Calvin Hoover had said the pills were messing with his head. One day, the son who lived with him went out to a wedding. Hoover, who was home alone, opened a bottle of red wine, stepped into the garage, sealed the door with tape, put headphones over his ears and switched on the generator, allowing carbon monoxide fill up the garage. When his son arrived, he found his father slumped dead over the lawn chair where he sat with an open bottle of his sedatives. In the bathroom of the main bedroom, his family discovered a yellow sticky note against the mirror, with the words, "Hope you all have a good life." Calvin Hoover decided to be a coward to end it all without using his final moment to confess his crime and exonerate Guy Paul Morin once and for all. He did not even think of giving his former friends, Bob and Janet Jessup, a peaceful end to their mystery. He took the secret to his grave. Detective Steve Smith was heartbroken when he discovered Hoover died 4 years earlier. It meant he would never face the consequences for his evil act. In order to conclusively determine if Calvin Hoover was the killer of Christine Jessup, Smith and his team went to the coroner's office where Calvin Hoover's blood samples had been retrieved after his death. DNA from the blood samples was then tested for a match to the DNA on Christine Jessup's underwear. The results came out a match. Finally, after 36 years, detectives were able to deliver the news of who killed Christine Jessup to her family and friends. Heather Hoover, on hearing the news about her ex-husband's evil act, said 10 years, he didn't show shit. He didn't show nothing. How does somebody do that? Janet Jessup's words carried the weight of a mother's pain, relief that the mystery had been solved, yet haunted by the unshakable truth that her daughter could never come back. Kenny Jessup's statement reflected the complexity of their emotions, a bittersweet mixture of relief and sorrow. To learn that the killer was someone they had trusted, someone close to their family, made the pain even deeper. It was a cruel twist of fate that the person who had been among their circle was the one who had taken Christine's life. The emotional toll of the case was not only about the loss of Christine but the betrayal that came with it, further complicating the healing process. Bob Jessup's words reflected the deep pain and anger that had been carried for years, knowing the truth about his daughter's killer but feeling helpless for so long. His expression of wanting justice in the most raw and visceral way highlighted the immense grief and frustration he had endured. Meanwhile, Guy Paul Moran's response, despite the years of suffering he had experienced, was remarkably composed. He expressed relief that the Jessups would finally have closure, but also conveyed a sense of inevitability, as if he had always known the truth would eventually surface. While the justice system had failed him, Moran's grace in the face of years of wrongful accusations stood in stark contrast to the man who had taken Christine's life. Moran's words echoed the profound relief he felt after the truth finally came to light. While the justice system had initially failed him, the breakthrough in forensic science proved his innocence, allowing him to reclaim his life. His community and loved ones shared in that relief, as they knew Guy Paul Moran had never been the monster he was painted to be. At the same time, the memory of Christine Jessup, a bright, compassionate young girl with a love for life, her family, school, and sports, remained etched in the hearts of those who knew her. Though her life was tragically cut short, she would always be remembered for the joy and warmth she brought to those around her. Thanks for watching.
you.